spotlight. Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name is Michael Rooks, and I'm the Wieland Family Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the High Museum, and I'm just logging onto my computer here. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're going to be talking about an exhibition called What Is Left Unspoken, our current exhibition at the museum right now. I hope you've had a chance to see it. If not, it'll be on view through August 14th. So please do see it if you can. Before we get started, we don't have a whole lot of time to talk about everything in the exhibition, so I've made a selection of some artworks in the exhibition for this presentation. But before we get started, it's an exhibition that has been sponsored by a generous grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as our premier exhibition sponsor, Delta Airlines, our premier supporters, ACT Foundation, Sarah and Jim Kennedy, Louise Sams and Jerome Grillo, the estate of Dr. Joan H. Weens, Harry Norman Realtors, and Wish Foundation, in addition to our benefactor supporters, Robin and Hilton Howell, the Taylor Family Fund, and the High Museum's Ambassador and Exhibition Series supporters. Thank you all, and thank you all for being here. I have to get my pointer out here, my clicker. So these are some questions that I wrote down in my notebook as I was organizing this exhibition. So I thought it'd be a good slide to put up as I introduce essentially what the exhibition's about. I started out with some reading, some sort of essential reading, and one of the books that I read was Bell Hooks' All About Love. And as Bell Hooks, I'm Rooks, separated at birth. As Hooks wrote almost 20 years ago, or more than 2 decades ago, there are not many public discussions about love today in our culture. It's something that we just don't like to talk about, unlike the life-affirming 60s or 70s when we were urged to believe that all you need is love. As a society, we're embarrassed by love. Everywhere we learn that love is the most important thing in the world, yet everywhere we turn, we are confronted by its abject failure, or so it seems if you turn on your news feed, for example, or drive to work during rush hour in the morning. So for us to speak of love with any emotional intensity today, especially if you're a man, is to risk being perceived as weak or irrational or mad, crazy. And the exhibition title, What Is Left Unspoken, refers to the situations, and I think there are many situations, in which love is unacknowledged or unresolved, and to the regret that may follow when we're unable to bring ourselves to give voice to the words, I love you. I know in my family, I didn't hear it until after I left for school, for college. Or perhaps, as many philosophers have suggested, it's the momentousness of saying I love you that is so petrifying. To say those 3 words, quote, marks the transition from chance to destiny, according to philosopher Giorgio Agamben. Agamben also believed that saying those words was incredibly important. For him, the meaning of love, quote, coincides with the act of its utterance. In other words, you speak it into being, and you can't undo it. You can't unsay it when you say those 3 words. So it's quite a dangerous and a momentous thing to do. Complicating matters, it's never clear what the word love means. Philosophers from Agamben to Alain Badiou, Jean-Luc Marion, agree that the declaration, I love you, remains ambiguous precisely because it describes nothing with any precision. And perhaps it's for that reason that it remains something difficult for us to verbalize, or even dangerous for that matter. How do you commit to something when you don't even know what it is? So the exhibition was conceived in 2003, but it was never realized as a sequel to an exhibition that I curated at the MCA Chicago titled War, What Is It Good For?, which was an exhibition in response to the impending American military invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. And the slide is from the exhibition. You see works by Beat Struley in the back, 2 sculptures by Keith Edmeyer, the only artist in the war show who is in the so-called love show today, and 2 sculptures by, or a sculpture rather, by David Hammonds in the foreground called Praying for Safety. So this exhibition was something that I conceived and we realized before we invaded Afghanistan, and it came down to the MCA after the war in Iraq started. So it was something that was quite timely and quite traumatic. So fast forward almost 2 decades today to once more a time of social and political discord when diplomacy and reason and common sense and decency and truth itself seem inoperable, when the culmination of racialized hate crimes and white supremacist terrorism has demonstrated the depths of lovelessness from which some of the most malignant ideas that have come to shape certain political and social realities in our country today. So I thought, why not give love a try? It reminds me of a piece, it's not in the exhibition, by the artist Sharon Hayes in MoMA's collection, and it's titled, Everything Else Has Failed, Don't You Think It's Time for Love? And it's not in the exhibition for logistical reasons, otherwise it would be in our exhibition. So, although love has been the subject of critical commentary from time immemorial, it still, of course, is something that remains elusive. And there's so many questions, like the ones that I showed you in the slide, to ask, and there's no ready answers. It's impossible, really, to wrap your head around the subject because of its enormity. Its dimensions have been described from millennia in discourse and dialogue, from the philosophical to the spiritual, from the ontological to the eschatological. Suffice it to say that this exhibition is a big idea show that is inspired by ancient questions. And also an exhibition that I thought was a good idea to do at this time, not only for the obvious reasons, but also in terms of contemporary art at a time when the art fair circuit, the art fair culture has reduced contemporary art, the so-called contemporary art world, to a circus of self-serving narcissists, in my opinion. That it's time to think about something serious. Why not turn our attention toward contemporary artists who are doing something very serious in their studios? So, in order to gain some purchase on this subject, the exhibition was organized around 6 ideas based loosely on the Platonic ladder. That is, ascending from the love of a beautiful individual to the love of beauty itself. And the framework is inflected by the Socratic question of human habits and actions and the nature of virtue as we conceive of those things today and as they are manifested today. It's also a 30-year survey of contemporary art featuring 35 artists who hail from 5 different continents around the world. So, in terms of structure, I tend to think of exhibitions as extraverbal texts, as a text that exists outside of language in a way. We tell a story with images and objects in addition to texts that we write for the exhibition. So this exhibition, like a book, begins with a prologue and ends with an epilogue, both related to time and timelessness, mortality and eternity. And if some of you remember or recall, our exhibitions in the Cousins Galleries typically go counterclockwise. And this exhibition is, we move through it in a clockwise fashion, and that was on purpose. That was because I was thinking about time in terms of how we experience it. In ways, I was thinking about time in a way that mirrors how we measure time, how we measure linear time, how we keep track of the present before it slips into the past. So instead of thinking of time in terms of history. So that's one of the intentional sort of curatorial conceits around the organization of the exhibition. This work on the screen we're looking at is a work by Andrea Galvani in the High Museum's collection called The End Action Number 5. And it's a quasi sculpture / performance, a hybrid work that incorporates technology and film. Obviously, it's a work that sits on a cast concrete pedestal. It's a MacBook Air, a gold MacBook Air, which is important to the artist. And it plays the loop of a film that was shot on 35 millimeter film, 16 millimeter film, from the cockpit of a military aircraft flying at the speed of sound toward the sun, only opposite the Earth's rotation. And so the effect is that the sun never sets on the horizon. It's as if time stands still. And so by hypothetically stopping time just before sunset, the work suggests both infinity and immortality at the idiomatic ends of the Earth as this jet is approaching the sun over the ocean, suspending for a moment the inevitability of death. The artist this is just anecdotally, his mother was dying at this time, and one of the ideas that he had was, what if we could just keep time suspended and keep time from moving? So while attempting to reconcile these things, the artist is also trying to reconcile the perception of passing time with theories that describe the timelessness of the universe, quantum mechanics. Andrea Galvani is a descendant of Luigi Galvani, the 18th century physiologist and philosopher for whom galvanization was named. So this artist is also loves to work with loves to work with scientists and philosophers, and he does all the time. He collaborates with them all the time. And so you can see how that figures into his work, his ancestry, which is very interesting. So one of the questions you might ask with this work is what we're seeing an illusion, or is it a demonstration of time's relativity? At the same time, the work alludes to the unfailing, eternal nature of love. So the first idea, I mentioned 6 ideas. The first idea in the show that we talk about is called The Two, and we borrow that from a book by Alain Badiou called In Praise of Love, and a chapter called The Scene of the Two, in all due respect to Badiou. And in this idea, love thrives rather than self-destructs in the creative tension between alterity and mutuality when a couple unite. And I say it thrives rather than self-destructs because in the romantic idea of two people coming together, typically they come together as one, which is a myth, really. No one can survive absorbing someone else's personality, or subjectivity. So, and typically, and you think of romantic stories, Romeo and Juliet, what have you, it always ends in disaster or tragedy. Anyway, so this idea is about how two people come together and their worlds join and create something much larger than two, in fact. And this was a leitmotif in the work of the late Cuban-American artist, Felix Gonzalez Torres, who employed minimalist and conceptualist strategies to produce deeply personal and often very poetic work, like the work you see on the left, which is called Untitled Perfect Lovers. It's a work in the exhibition. You have to kind of look for it because it's up high on the wall. And it consists of 2 store-bought battery-operated clocks, which are synchronized at the outset of the exhibition. And as the batteries run out, as the batteries die over the course of the exhibition, the clocks, of course, become unsynchronized. They fall out of sync. The clocks represent the artist and his lover, Ross Laycock. They're metaphors for a couple, for 2 people. The rims are touching as if they're kissing or embracing in a way. And so the idea of these clocks falling out of sync over time is a really beautiful and touching and moving metaphor for how we fall out of sync with our partners over time, physically as we age, emotionally perhaps, psychologically, and in other ways. In this case, I mentioned the rims touch. It's important because that's one of the central morphologies in Felix Gonzalez Torres' work, rings. And this work is actually the first of only 2 clock works that he made out of this morphology of rings. You see this work here from the U.S. Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. It's called Reflecting Pools. And there are 2 rings that, again, are touching, just barely kissing in a way, suggesting the intimacy of a relationship. But the clocks and this whole cycle of objects made out of rings and circles suggests the inability of the couple, to, quote, fuse into one, to constitute a perfectly doubled subjectivity, unquote, according to art historian Adair Runswaite. This work was conceived after Laycock was diagnosed with AIDS and implies the timeless bond of love and the possibility of renewal as the clocks are reset. When the batteries die, we put new batteries in and reset the clocks, and we start all over again. Yet the work resists this romantic idea of love because they can never remain perfectly synchronized, however many times we replace the batteries. So further into the exhibition, you'll see these two sculptures. They're by conceptual artist Keith Edmeyer and the late actor Farrah Fawcett. The sculpture on the left of Farrah Fawcett was sculpted by Keith Edmeyer, and the sculpture of Keith Edmeyer here was sculpted by Farrah Fawcett. Edmeyer Fawcett, like many young men of his generation, he's my age, in fact, and he had a poster of Farrah Fawcett on his bedroom wall. I remember those posters well, from Charlie's Angels. And so when he became a well-regarded conceptual artist, he learned that Farrah Fawcett studied sculpture at UT Austin. And so he contacted her via her agent and suggested this collaboration. It turned out to be an almost 3-year collaboration that was called Recasting Pygmalion, because Edmeyer actually also had ties to the film and television industry, so it kind of was an allusion to that for both artists. And the centerpiece of the collaboration was these two works. Each sculpted the other, obviously, and they sculpted each other as ideals. The sculpture of Fawcett is as Fawcett looked when she was playing Jill Monroe in Charlie's Angels, even though she was in her mid-50s at this time. And Edmeyer is sculpted as a sort of heroic classical figure. The figures become intermediaries between the present and the past for the artist, their nudity evoking this classical antiquity. And the collaboration as a whole explores the problematic relationship between muse and maker, celebrity and fan, inspiration and collaboration, love and friendship. And Edmeyer described this relationship to me as a, quote, kind of marriage, a friendship that was based in art. So the actual marriage of these two artists, Chinese artist Rong Rong and Japanese artist Inri, was the inspiration for a portfolio of 16 photographs that they shot on Lake Yamanaka in front of Mount Fuji. Their performance documented essentially their marriage vows, if you will. They were married, but at the time they were married, just before this was made, they couldn't speak each other's language. Inri couldn't speak Mandarin, and Rong Rong could not speak Japanese. And so this joint performance, which lasted all day, it goes from morning until sunset, in the nude, in the winter, on a partially frozen lake, risking hypothermia and the possibility of the lake failing on them. It was this beautiful joint performance of a ritual exchanging of vows, and one in which their wordless pronouncements, and a lot of the work, you'll come back to the title, Unspoken and Wordless. These were wordless pronouncements during this performance that rescued and expressed aspects of their love for each other that otherwise may have remained lost in translation. So the next idea we talk about, talk about in the exhibition is called the School of Love, and that's something that I borrowed from the late Bell Hooks, from her wonderful book, All About Love. The School of Love for Bell Hooks was the home where, if we're lucky, we learn how to receive love and how to give love in return through care, affirmation, trust, commitment, respect between family members. And the kitchen, of course, is the heart of the home, and it's the site for Carrie Mae Weems's landmark work of postmodern feminism called the Kitchen Table Series, a portfolio of 20 photographs and 14 texts. It's very hard to see this entire portfolio together, so it's a rare opportunity, maybe a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see it. So if you haven't, please check it out. And what we have upstairs are not these silver gelatin prints. What we have are the platinum prints, which are extra beautiful in my opinion. They're gorgeous. So anyway. The Kitchen Table series is a narrative. It's a visual and textual narrative set in the kitchen, which is the place of sociability and creativity, of course, as well as a place of domestic labor, traditionally assigned to women. And through both accompanying texts and image, we learn how the protagonist, played by the artist, Carrie Mae Weems, endeavors to nurture self-love and self-respect within a romantic relationship encumbered by traditional roles in gender politics. The artist plays the role of mother. I think one of the images, previous images, I can't go back. You see her with her children around the table. Another image, another series of images relate to her as a lover, thank you, and or a wife as a partner. Another set of images relate to her friends and the community of friends that are so important. The series talks about her professional role and how to balance all of these things while seeking agency as a black woman in the world. My clickers. Is my clicker not working? There we go. Next one, please. I may have to ask for slides, so bear with me. This is a work by Khalil Robert Irving, a young artist who made this work for the exhibition. It's called My Grandmother's Cupboard Artifact. And Khalil has a regular practice of making hand-glazed, or handmade black glazed vessels. Objects, utilitarian objects, plates and cups and saucers. And so he has hundreds of these objects. This installation consists of hundreds of these objects in a cabinet. It's dedicated to his grandmother because at the start of the pandemic, he moved from New York to St. Louis to take care of his grandmother in St. Louis. And he's still there, and they become kind of a team. In fact, she came for the installation and came for the opening. It was wonderful. But he settled down and now has this life in St. Louis. And he was reflecting on his grandmother and her generation and all the struggle that she went through. And so in this work, the vessels are huddled together in this cabinet in a way to suggest black togetherness, which provided the love and the care and the strength to his grandmother and her generation as they endured the crucible of racism during the era of segregation. And there's many different iterations of this installation using the black glazed. Actually, you know what? I think the battery died on my clicker, so I'm going to have to ask for, because I can't even use my pointer. So anyway, there's a lot of different iterations of these works by Khalil using his collection of black glazed ceramics. This is a work by Patty Chang in the exhibition, and Patty Chang is an LA-based artist. And it's the third in a trilogy of collaborations she made with her parents. The first one was called In Love from 2001. The second one was called On Love from 2003. And this is called Que Sera Sera Invocations. And it is a work that is really it's a powerful work. It's hard to watch because the video shows the artist on the right in her father's bedroom as he's dying. Essentially, he's in palliative care, dying, and she's cradling her newborn and sings to her newborn Que Sera Sera, a song, of course, from The Man Who Knew Too Much, sung from the point of view of a mother to her son, a child, and then alternately from the point of view of the child to his mother, the grown child to his mother, suggesting this cycle of life, which is how we experience linear time as human beings, right, in this cycle. On the left, the artist's mother's hands are shown scrolling on an iPad. And she's reading, as she's scrolling, all these phrases that describe the feelings she was going through over the course of her husband's death. The work explores the navigation of these kinds of uncomfortable or painful emotions, as well as self-doubt and the desire to minimize these kinds of feelings. Patty Cheng has always dealt with, quote, certain anxieties, unquote, in her work, quote, undercurrents of ugly or minor feelings, unquote. And these are terms coined by cultural theorist Sian Ngai and poet Kathy Park Hong, respectively, to refer to the Asian American experience of disenfranchisement and the disentitlement of one's own feelings, to not express these kinds of emotions in public. And this is something, and there's a leitmotif and something that Patty Cheng returns to frequently in her work. Her work is typically performative. It's a performative-based video practice. The next slide shows us work by Susanna Coffey and introduces the next idea in the show, which we call the practice of love, which refers to a loving practice as something that comes from intention, from commitment, from action, something that is intentional. A self-sacrificing kind of love, which requires the cultivation of a positive sense of self, a self-enabling kind of love that allows one to love others selflessly. So the artist Susanna Coffey on the screen has had a reflexive practice of self-portraiture, which has been the primary focus of her work for over 3 decades. And what we're looking at are 2 paintings from the exhibition. The one on the left is from the Art Institute of Chicago from 1993, and the one on the right is from 2018. Obviously, the one on the right is not actually a self-portrait, or not a real self-portrait. That would be remarkable. But it's more of a theoretical self-portrait or a philosophical self-portrait. And it underscores the fact that Coffey endeavors to maintain the subjective distance from her subject, herself, to impart a profound kind of clarity, as well as to suggest a dissociation of mind and body, a state of mindfulness that the late Buddhist monk and activist Thich Nhat Hanh would describe as a noble silence. And in fact, there's a painting among this group of works by Susanna Coffey in the show titled Video e Tacio, which is Elizabeth I's motto. It means, I hear, but I see nothing. I see, but I say nothing. Getting my quotes mixed up. The next slide is work by Wengechi Mutu. And this is a work titled Sisters. It's a sculpture, obviously. It consists of 2 bronze heads. They're facing each other, literally kind of reflecting each other. Even though each is unique, their heads are crowned with these intricate marine-like braids that declare a shared ancestry. And the mirrored polished tabletop they're sitting on creates a kind of double reflection, which for me and for the artist suggests a profound meditation on Black kinship as a loving practice and as a source of power and knowledge. Thank you very much. If you have seen the work, it's quite a gorgeous sculpture. If you get close enough, you can see their eyes are closed as well. And their closed eyes, for me, suggest the possibility of a shared dream or a state of becoming that's yet to be achieved in the work. Oh, next slide, please. This process of self-care and self-actualization is important to this artist, genderqueer and Afro-Latinx artist, Felicita Feli Maynard. Thank you. Which is part of a project that she undertook around 2017 when she was in a mentorship program for an organization in New York called Queer Art. And they started this mentorship program called the Queer Art Mentorship. And she was working with the great photographer Lola Flash. And it occurred to her that there was this absence or this dearth of documentation of queer Black ancestry, of history. There's very little written, and there are very little, if any, images that exist. So this artist set out to redress that, and in so doing, she created a fictional archive of their queer family roots using antique wet plate collodion processes to stage imagined histories of queer and trans Black people. And we have 2 bodies of work in the show. One is dedicated to, and they're both dedicated to imaginary figures that the artist invented. One figure is named Jean-Laurent Feliz, which is the work we're looking at on the screen. And the other body of work is dedicated to a character named Angelo Elwazi Owenzayo. So the artist plays Jean-Laurent Felice in this body of work. These are 2 images from 8 in the exhibition. And both include ambrotype photographs, which are glass plate photographs. The work on the right, called Prix-Jean, is an ambrotype. And if you've ever held an ambrotype in your hand, it's very difficult to see anything. It almost looks transparent. In fact, when I unpacked them, I was panicking because I thought, oh my God, there's nothing on these images. But the thing is, when you set them down on a dark surface, the image appears like magic. It just appears out of nowhere. It's really remarkable. So the image on the right is an ambrotype image. And the image on the left is a dual image. It's both a tin type, which is opaque, obviously, on a tin plate. And over top that is laid an ambrotype, a transparent glass plate, which gives you the effect of this transition of the character from female to male. A really quite beautiful work. And my experience installing these, I just described, which made me embarrassed. Maybe I should have handled ambrotypes in the past, but I'm a contemporary art curator after all, you know. But it was really like magic. And to me, it just underscored the fact that this artist literally, quite literally, and also figuratively, make the invisible visible in her work. And that was the whole point of this body of work for Feli Maynard. The next slide shows work by Jeffrey Gibson. And like Maynard, Jeffrey Gibson's work centers a loving practice within community. He's a citizen of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Cherokees, and he draws strength and inspiration from his First Peoples and LGBTQ communities. This is a work, sort of a signature punching bag sculpture by Gibson. And you can see he typically uses glass beads and metal jingles in his work, things that reflect the traditional regalia, power regalia of the Cherokee peoples, while also at the same time drawing on the aesthetics of queer culture to consider aspects of indigenous queer love in his work. The motto you see on the sculpture, the love you give is the love you, what is it? The love you give is the love you get, right? Yes, there it is a misquote. It's a misquote from by John Lennon of a Paul McCartney lyric, which was, the love you take is the love you make. And that lyric, that misquote rather, was made into a patch. You know, these kinds of activist patches of the 70s you'd sew onto your jean jacket. And this artist has a collection of these vintage activist patches, and this is one of the patches in his collection. So it's kind of where the inspiration for this work came from. So this is a work by Carrie James Marshall, which relates to another idea in the exhibition, a big idea in the exhibition, in fact, perhaps the idea that inspired the rest of the ideas in the exhibition. And it's about community. When Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi co-founded Black Lives Matter in 2013 after the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer, it became the most influential and far-reaching social movement of a generation, which was, quote, fueled by love for Black life, Black joy, and a vision for a world in which we collectively love on Black communities, unquote. And that's from their founding statement. So this idea in the show, we call loving community, which is something we were based on Martin Luther King's beloved community, obviously. It's this next idea in which we consider a love ethic between friends and comrades, community, to evoke the most powerful thing, the most powerful kind of collective action that we've seen in this generation, but also in the last 50 or 100 years. Go back to Gandhi's Satyagraha, for example. So this is a painting by Carrie James Marshall, and it's from a monumental cycle of paintings of 4 works. They're called the Souvenir Series. And this painting from the series memorializes and immortalizes the fallen heroes of King's freedom movement. The other paintings in the series are at the Addison Gallery, SF MoMA, and the Whitney. So we're very fortunate to have this work from MCA Chicago's collection, which is the first in the series, in my opinion, one of the best. They're all excellent. But this is a wonderful painting because it does pay tribute to these martyrs of the freedom movement. Other paintings pay tribute to others who were important artists and writers and musicians who were important in the civil rights movement. But this starts out with this dedication to these figures who are shown at the top in the form of sort of angelic spirits, pink and blue. They are images of Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, Black Panther activists Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, freedom writers Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Schwerner, and the 4 children murdered in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, Addie Mae Collins, here, Addie Mae Collins, Carol Denise McNear, Carol Rosamund Robertson, and Cynthia Dion Wesley. One of the beautiful things about this project is that it commemorates these individuals and many more and puts a name to their faces and to their histories. Marshall grew up in Birmingham, by the way, and he was 8 years old when the church bombing happened. So it was something that was an important event in his life and so many in all of our lives. The next work, or next body of works in the exhibition are by Tamashi Jackson, who's a young artist based in Boston. And her project also it honors and commemorates the collective action of King's beloved community, while also drawing parallels to the present-day struggle for racial justice and the ongoing efforts by some, we know who, to roll back hard-won rights through voter suppression and other tactics. Her research-based work brings formal and material investigations in dialogue with historical narratives of governance and policy. And this is a body of work. These are 2 works in the show from a body of work called Love Roller Coaster. We have 4 works in the exhibition from this body of work. And Love Roller Coaster works refer to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and they include images from the civil rights era of people waiting in line at polling places that were intentionally put in back alleys and in different places difficult to find for the black community. In addition to contemporary images of politicians from the last cycle of election cycle from 2020, the last general election, in order to compress 50 years of time, in order to cast light upon the ongoing attempts to undermine the voting rights of Americans. So, parallel with community organization during the civil rights era, the gay community came together in the 1960s to fight systemic oppression and injustice. And General Idea was one of the first, perhaps the first collective, at least, in Toronto, formed in 1969, to explore media critique and queer theory. What we're looking at is one of the works in the exhibition. There's 2 paintings called Great AIDS, paintings based on Robert Indiana's Love logo. And most of their work from 1987 to the early 90s addressed the AIDS crisis, which ultimately claimed the lives of 2 of the partners. The collective consisted of A.A. Bronson, Felix Parts, and Jorge Zontal. Parts and Zontal died from complications due to AIDS in 93 or 94. A.A. Bronson is still alive and manages the estate. And from 87 through until the time of their death, the AIDS was the primary subject of their work. And they set out to make this image here. They wanted to call it, or rather they were inspired by William S. Burroughs. William S. Burroughs, who coined the idea of a word virus, something that once introduced into the public sphere replicates itself through cultural transmission like a disease, or today, a meme. But this was long before the social media. So they set out to make what they called a logo for the disease. And that may sound cynical, but if you remember the days of the 80s, during the AIDS crisis, there was a many attempts by artists, Grand Fury, General Idea, Act Up, to to educate the public, to make people aware that this was a disease that real people suffered from. So by conflating the word love with the acronym AIDS was really controversial, of course. It's something that, for these artists, brought attention to the feelings of love between gay men at the height of the AIDS pandemic and generated ambiguity in society's relationship with HIV/AIDS, conflating it with the word love. You know, is it really the only way that you contract this disease, and is it only gay men? It also generated a bond for the first time, perhaps, according to the artist in Toronto, between the gay and straight communities. He described it as an outpouring of love, of people coming out to help. This work is twice mirrored, the AIDS logo, twice mirrored and inverted to suggest a viral mutation, again, as well as the logo's potentially transgressive illegibility and subliminality. This work in the exhibition is by Rasheed Johnson. It's a recent acquisition. It's called The Hikers, and it's a film that was made in collaboration with the Martha Graham Dance Company and composer Antoine Baldwin. And it is this unspoken narrative set to a piano etude. The dancers you see from Martha Graham here are wearing masks, and those masks refer to Rasheed Johnson's cycle and series of paintings and drawings that he calls Anxious Men. The Anxious Men series represent the anxiety of being black in a world where mobility and expression is limited and prescribed by racist structures that reinforce the subjection of black bodies in the public sphere. So the narrative arc of the film, it's a 7-minute film, really beautiful. I first saw it at the Istanbul Biennial in 2019, the year it was made, and texted Rasheed immediately to say, we have to have this film. It is just too beautiful. Two hikers on a wilderness trail in Aspen, and one is ascending, one is descending, very much like the parable of the Good Samaritan on the road to Jericho. And they are going through these motions that are very awkward, and the artist describes that as the kind of motions that you make, the kind of movements that you make when you're not being observed, when you're just being yourself. And sometimes you're awkward and you're kind of silly looking, or you're just not very graceful because you're not on. But when the two hikers meet on this trail, face to face, they pause, they remove their masks, and they discover their mutual blackness. And so as they take comfort in each other's mutual blackness, they perform this pas de deux, this beautiful, wonderful ballet, which is about really platonic love in a way. It's a kind of a love story between strangers in a dangerous world, basically. According to Johnson, these kinds of situations, when, quote, when people of color recognize the existence of one another in public space, there's this kind of joy, almost love, unquote. This slide introduces the next idea in the exhibition, which is about poetry, and we call it the poetics of love. And this idea in the show acknowledges the ways in which love has been expressed and invoked and evoked and put to the test in prose and poetry, in language. And poetry is essential to this work by James Drake, who, it's a 3-channel video. You can see each of the channels here. There's 2 different versions. Our version is on 3 flat screens. So this is a different version where they're kind of stitched together. So a 3-channel video that features these 3 women, Gabriella, Angie, and Liz. And it was shot in El Paso, Texas. The artist was in El Paso working, and he observed women gesturing across the street from the jailhouse in El Paso, and he was curious. They were gesturing with their arms and hands, and got to know them and realized that they invented this sign language in order to communicate with their loved ones in jail as a get-around, as a way to avoid the costly and time-consuming process of in-person visits. Of course, they're working. They probably had multiple jobs, and to do in-person visits was just not possible. So they invented this language. And so the artists worked with them to introduce poetry into their unspoken, again, language, and into their daily unspoken conversations with their loved ones, offering them Shakespearean sonnets, as well as poems by Jorge Borges, Federico Lorca, Benjamin Saints, Cormac McCarthy, and Antonio Machado. Really beautiful piece. The language of love is also essential to this work by Ghada Amer. Ghada Amer is an Egyptian-born artist. And I included this image on the right to give you, to drive home the point that love is a subject that is essential in her work. Ghada Amer, you could probably say that this is the subject that is the most important thing in Ghada Amer's work. And this is called Love Grave, kind of interesting in terms of the connection between love and death. Nevertheless, the work in our show is this one. And it is a latticework bronze sphere consisting of 100 words in Arabic for the word love. We have one word in Arabic, there's at least 100, which undermines Islamophobic stereotypes, perhaps. But this artist, of course, understood that words expressed in calligraphy are themselves the subject of art and Arabic culture. And so her interconnected words suggest the fluidity and poetics of language, but also reflect her this history in the culture of Arabic art and calligraphy. Paradoxically, if you could read Arabic, they're spelled backwards. So you can only read them if you're inside or looking through to the back of the words, or if you're using a mirror, which is an interesting thing for me because it suggests the failure of language to adequately describe love, or perhaps the illegibility, of language in these cases. And this is a work by Reena Banerjee in the exhibition with Tamashi Jackson's work from Love Roller Coaster around the edge, around the perimeter walls. Reena Banerjee's work here is called Take Me, Take Me, Take Me to the Palace of Love. And for me, it's the poetic nexus for the intersection of ephemeral and eternal love in the exhibition. It's a miniature version of the Taj Mahal Palace in hot pink cellophane, a material that certainly is not archival. It breaks down and deteriorates. So it's ephemeral. It's a work that is ephemeral in nature. And her choice of the color for this installation was intended to challenge conventions, particularly the conventions of the Victoria era of the British Raj, that white is the color of purity, whereas red in our culture is the color of passion or danger, something that's illicit, maybe. Red is used on auspicious occasions in Hindu religion and culture. Occasions like marriage or the birth of a child suggest innocence and purity, as well as sensuality, as it does in many other cultures. And so Reena wanted to use this color for her installation for several reasons. Another interesting note is that in Hindu culture, if your wife precedes you in death, her body's wrapped in a red cloth. And of course, the Taj Mahal Palace was built by Shah Jahan in the 17th century as a monument to his dead wife, Mumtaz Mahal. So that may or may not play into why this artist chose this color, but an interesting side note. And it hovers above the floor. It's suspended from the ceiling like a mirage, like an illusion in the exhibition, a floating monument to the deceased Mumtaz Mahal, alluding again to ephemerality and the transience of life. And for me, connecting with poetry, because if you think of this monument to Mumtaz Mahal, built by her loyal husband, the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan, It evokes the last line of the most famous love poem in our language, perhaps, that is Elizabeth Barrett Browning's sonnet number 43, which is popularly known as How Do I Love Thee? The last line, of course, being, I shall love thee better after death. So, in poetry and in visual art, typically the heart is a universal metaphor for love. We see it, usually see it in the form of a Valentine shape, this stylized Valentine shape, right? But Houston-based artist Dario Robleto argues that it's the biological organ, not this Valentine, that is a subject rich in symbolic and poetic significance. And this is a work in the exhibition from a recent body of work based on the pioneering endeavors of 19th century physiologist Angelo Mosso, who was the founder of the field of neuroimaging, long before the advent of electrocardiology. It features a cast of 2 heartbeats. These are heartbeats that are based on the actual recordings that Mosso made in the 1850s of a subject who was asked to think about the first love of his life. And so the recordings documented his heartbeat before the question and after the question. In a way, proving love is real, and it has a physiological effect on people. This artist is very interested in the history of recording, which is why he embarked on this research project in terms of waveform recordings in the 19th century. And it's really quite a beautiful idea to recover this moment that happened almost 200 years ago, cast it in stainless steel and plate it with brass, and to put it in these vitrines to memorialize it for perpetuity. Really quite beautiful. Harvard professor Jennifer Roberts describes this artist's project as, quote, the validation of emotional knowledge, particularly through the promotion and testing of empathy as the fundamental function of art. And this is the essential question that this exhibition really asks, to tell you the truth. You know, is it possible for art to promote and test empathy as an essential function? I think so. So this is one of 2 works by Dario Robleto in the exhibition. The final idea in the show is something we call Love Supreme, and it's referring to the title of Coltrane's album, Allah Supreme. I'm sorry, Coltrane's album is called A Love Supreme, and it's said that it's supposed to really have been titled Allah Supreme, referring to how the role of faith in Coltrane's music. Nevertheless, it was titled A Love Supreme. We borrowed that for the title, and it addresses the presentiment that humankind and nature and the cosmos have a common creative force, one that's vast and, again, unspeakable, whether through an experience of divine love or an experience of the unbound, unlimited grandeur of the natural world. And this artist we're looking at here is Vivian Suter. She is an Argentinian artist who's been based in Guatemala for more than 30 years. And I think of her work in terms of the history of Trappist monk Thomas Merton, who posited that God's presence in nature gave us all meaning, which is absorbed in one central note, one unheard, one uttered note, unquote. This Merton's renunciation of materiality in the silence of his hermitage in Kentucky, it's there where he sought to find true love, that is God in nature. And this artist living in Guatemala for more than 30 years has likewise sought this kind of communion with nature, albeit through her studio practice. She lives in Panajachel, which is in the volcanic basin of the Lake Atitlan in southwestern Guatemala. It's a gorgeous little city. And she has a home and studio, which is on a former coffee plantation. It's now a secondary growth rainforest. And she works both in her studio and outside in her garden in the rainforest. And she allows nature to collaborate with her. From the rain, from the growth of mold, from the intervention of insects and animals. And that collaboration doesn't end when the work is finished. She hangs her work outside in her garden. It blows in the wind. It gets rained on. Again, animals intervene. So she exposes these canvases to the elements. And in this way, her work represents this kind of Merton-esque loving accord with nature. If you look at the paintings, this one particularly, down here, you can see there's leaves and sticks and things stuck in it. And you can find other kinds of natural material stuck in the canvases. This one here, if you go to the back wall, is actually deteriorating. So it's a collection of paintings that are shown in a way that she would show them in her gallery, or in her garden, in a way that is not in a conventional way around the perimeter of a gallery wall, but hanging in space so that we can interact with them as if we were in nature in a forest. This artist, Michelle Stewart, is a pioneering artist of the earth and land art movements of the 60s and 70s. She's almost 90, if she's not 90 today. And so she makes these wonderful installations based on her archive of analog and digital photography, as well as her collection of paleontological objects that she collected over the course of her travels on walks and beaches and forests and in deserts. And this work is called In the Beginning, Time and Dark Matter, in which the juxtaposition of these images here in the bottom register are all marine images from beneath the ocean. Images on the top are images of the cosmos, and of course shells and fossils on the table. So this juxtaposition connects the earthbound with the cosmological, reflecting on such weighty subjects as the origin and composition of the universe, as well as the relativity of time. At the same time, her work preserves and privileges the mysteries and contingencies inherent in poetic expression through these kinds of adjacencies and connections. This artist from Mexico, Mexican artist, Gabriel Rico, has made a series of these murals that he calls Reducción Objetiva Orquestada, in which he's gathered together found objects and other objects that he's fashioned on a wall that are brought into relation with each other through a wall drawing, these kinds of wall drawings here that suggest mathematics, equations, formulas, quantum mechanics. However, unlike Stewart, this artist, his proposition implies a kind of metaphysical system for grappling with the origin of being, while conveying the impossibility of truly knowing the secrets of the universe in this absurdist neo-Dada fashion with a Coca-Cola tray here and a wrench. And what do all these things have in common? Who knows? But he's suggesting that this is one key perhaps in understanding the secrets of the universe. A wonderful artist. This is a work by Paul Pfeiffer called John 3:16. The title, of course, refers to the biblical citation that basically tells us that God's love for humanity makes redemption possible through the sacrifice of his only Son. It also refers to a moment in time when this was made, 2001, during televised basketball games when fans in the stadium would proselytize. They would hold up a sign with the citation for the benefit of television cameras as a mode of evangelizing. John 3:16. And when I saw that, I always wondered, what in the heck is going on? I don't get it. There must be some secret no one's letting me in on. So Paul thought the same thing and made this work, which consists of a small monitor here, 4 feet out from the wall, so it's literally in your face. It's very small, so it requires an intimate kind of experience of the work. And it features this montage of images from televised basketball games in which the basketball remains in the center of the screen. You see all these hands for the basketball players as if they're caressing the ball or holding it aloft, but they're really just kind of, in a magical way, kind of caressing this ball, which to me, because this artist is referring to a biblical passage, reminds me of an art historical subject, which is the Salvatore Mundi, which is that of Christ holding the earth, right, in his hand. An art historical reference in the middle of this work that is actually quite cynical. Pfeiffer is referring to Guy Debord's Society of the Spectacle in this work, which contends that in today's culture, experiences like sporting events and religion, which are presumed to unify people, actually estrange them. And this artist is questioning the efficacy of proselytization and the preaching of a message about love within the spectacle. This work is by Maria de los Angeles Rodriguez Jimenez and acknowledges and questions the beliefs of Catholicism and her Afro-Cuban ancestors, the Lukumi and Yoruba of her native Cuba. It's called Caridad, Charity, and it's the outcome of her performance at Yale in 2018, in which the artist kneels on a concrete floor and as if in prayer and supplication, and destroys kind of violently these votive candles with the image of Nuestra Señora de la Caridad del Cobre, which is a quintessential image of Cuban identity and also the patron saint of Cuba. Residual shards from the performance were incorporated into the belly of this sculpture. I call it the belly, in the center of the sculpture, forming a heavy sag, which evokes a kind of heavy, pregnant belly, suggesting a virgin birth. So this artist's allusion to the syncretic spiritual practices of Cuba invests the work with the feeling of the sacred, while the dangerous shards of broken glass on the floor beneath it call into question the efficacy of either a spiritual or socially engaged practice, or such Christian theological virtues as charity in our world today. The next artist is Jenna Vanderlee, who we are really privileged to have with us this evening. Vanderlee was inspired by her upbringing in the Dutch Calvinist Church, as well as her travels in the American Southwest, and her study of Navajo Diné weaving and spiritual traditions. So this artist employs abstraction in her fiber-based practice to describe the dimensions of love that become awakened in a spiritual life. Through her study of and practice of these traditions, she has also championed for decades fiber art as a valid mode of artistic expression, and has continued the work of other pioneers like Annie Albers or Claire Zeisler or Sheila Hicks in this field, combining modes of European abstraction with indigenous American sources to convey the power of the human spirit, a connection to spirituality and the transcendence of religious experience. For me, the work in the exhibition also serves as an ellipsis at the end of the exhibition. This is the last gallery, last gallery before we get to the epilogue, remember. So before you enter the last gallery, Jana's work is there and serves as this ... which for me is an equivalent for that which is left unspoken. So the final, and they're just gorgeous works too. The final work is our prologue in the exhibition. And our epilogue rather, if our prologue, Andrea Galvani's The End, begins with the end, then our epilogue here ends with a beginning. That is the heartbeat which represents the beginning of almost every life. And if you have not experienced it yet, I would urge you to please go up and participate in this installation. It's by Rafael Lozano Hemmer, a Mexican artist based in Montreal. And it consists of 99 light bulbs strung from the ceiling, and they're connected to these sensors. And you're invited as a participant to register your biometric data on these sensors. And when you do, your unique heartbeat and biometric data is conveyed, is transferred into the first bulb hanging in front of your face, this bulb here. And when your heartbeat registers on that bulb, it then is transferred into the rest of the room. The rest of the room is populated with 98 other heartbeats. So you're really joining a room full of anonymous people, anonymous heartbeats, the heartbeats of a collective group of strangers, which for me conjured, again, Merton. And I'm not a religious person, but one of the things I wanted to do is to do things you don't do in contemporary art. And one of the things you don't do in contemporary art is talk about faith and spirituality. For me, this work reminded me of Merton's famous Epiphany in 1958 in Louisville, where he, quote, suddenly saw the secret beauty of the hearts of all these strangers around him on the intersection of Walnut and 4th Street. Quote, the depths of their heart, he saw the depths of their hearts, these billion points of light coming together in the face and blaze of a sun that would make all the darkness and cruelty of life vanish completely, unquote. I thought of that as I was organizing the show, and I always wanted to include this installation in the exhibition anyway, and it seemed like a wonderful kind of kismet that this reference seemed to sync up with Lozano Hemmer's work. However, the artist's work also connects people to the ubiquitous forms of information technology that conspire with networks around which identities are formed, societies are structured, and people are controlled. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's an image, this beautiful image of collectivity, of people together in a room, 99 strangers together in a room, but also an image of technology and how it controls us. It's also an image of absence and presence, the absence of all these strangers in a room. But if you're the 99th person at the end of the string of lights and someone participates, you're bumped out of the room. So it also kind of alludes to this cycle of absence and presence. So, in conclusion, finally we've got here, I'm sorry, I hope I'm keeping you over time. The exhibition essentially will always be a work in progress, even though it's not traveling. It will always be a work in progress in whatever I do and whatever these artists do. The German word Entwicklungsmöglichkeit describes the possibility or capacity of something like an idea to be developed. And the subject of love has an inexhaustible capacity for development in every arena of human endeavor, especially in the field of art. And in the absence of the right words, perhaps art, like love, which is also an indefinite monosyllabic word, allows us to gain a purchase on love's ineffable nature. And I hope this exhibition does so too. So thank you so much for coming, and I hope you see the exhibition. I can also take questions if anyone wishes to ask a question. We're a little over time, but I'm delighted to ask any or answer any questions.
Hello. Does anybody have any questions? No? Oh, one question. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your wonderful talk and for
Thank you.
putting together this beautiful show. And I wanted to ask you about, so I'm interested in the idea of ineffability of love, and that has kind of sadness to it, but also beautiful, like the Felix Gonzalez Torres works. But then it also strikes me, and maybe I'm prejudiced as a writer, but that there's a beauty to trying to explain it, to trying to explain love. And so I'm wondering if that is also, but do you see that as a value of the show, or even if some of the show answer some of the questions that you wrote at the beginning that side with all those very important questions? So that is my question.
No, that's a good question, and it's one of the chief challenges of doing an exhibition like this, a big idea exhibition, because when you begin to explain histories or ideas of the histories of ideas, there's no end. And this is probably why this kind of show doesn't get done very often, at least in our country. And in Europe, it seems that they're willing to do these kinds of thematic big idea shows. So my goal was for the individual works that were selected for each to represent or to be in conversation with these ideas to help to explain what we mean. And in the catalog, which it's a shameless plug for our catalog here, my essay does kind of walk you through these ideas and explains the rationale, the curatorial rationale for the exhibition and for these 6 ideas, and it also includes a bibliography of suggested reading from antiquity to contemporary philosophy to other writers. It's a good question because in relation to the catalog, we didn't ask other art historians or curators to contribute. We asked artists to contribute. Because after working on this for so long, I mean, I worked on it for 2 years, but I thought about it for a whole long time. It occurred to me that art is the best means of conveyance of many of these ideas. And so we invited poets and a novelist to contribute writing to the catalog. A beautiful work by Puerto Rican poet Noel Quiñones, poet laureate Pearl Clegg writes this wonderful poem, and French author, novelist Sonia David. So it's an unusual book too. Everything about the show, I guess, is unusual because it departs from the convention of having 3 or 4 essays by art historians. In my opinion, we can do that kind of research if you're interested in learning about self-love. You know, there's Kierkegaard. You know, if you're interested in learning about the Socratic ideas, you can go to the symposium. Anyway, sorry, I'm blathering on. But does that answer your question? It addresses it anyway.
I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you, Michael, and everyone who attended tonight. I hope you have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks.